Okay, today we're going to be going over replacing your struts. Now what we're particularly working on here is a 2014 Chevy Impala, but struts are going to be pretty well the same on every vehicle, possibly slight variations in how they come off, but overall same concept. So I have some things off here because I also just did a video on brakes on this car. So the caliper and rotor does not need to come off to do this, just the tire. So just disregard that. So what we're going to have is two bolts that hold the strut on. You can see my socket's on one, and then you see the one below it. And then you're also going to have another socket up here that has this arm on it. And then we'll have the mount bolt inside the engine bay for the top of the strut. So what you want to do is jack the vehicle up, put a jack stand underneath there, take the wheel off, and then we're going to be putting a jack under this control arm and jacking this up to get the weight and tension off of these bolts. Today's fun-filled adventure is going to be replacing the front struts on a 2014 Chevy Impala. This is actually a very simple job. You have that nut right there in front of us, that has to come off, and then we have two right here on the body of the strut. So what we're going to do is, once you've jacked up your vehicle, you got your tire off in that, you have right here where the brake hose is attached, go ahead and pull that out. It's held up by this bracket on the strut assembly, so we're going to pop that up out of there. And then what we're going to do is put a jack underneath of your hub assembly here and just jack it up enough to take the weight, some of the tension off of these bolts that we're going to be taking out. So now that I have the tension taken off, okay, during today's adventure we're going to be replacing the front struts on a 2014 Chevy Impala. It's actually a very simple job. Once you've got your vehicle jacked up and you got a jack stand under there and you've got your wheel taken off, go ahead and put your jack underneath of your hub assembly here, your control arm there, and go ahead and jack that up just enough to take the tension, put some pressure on the spring to take the tension off the bolts we're going to be removing. So a couple things we need to take off here. Right there you'll see where the brake hose goes through this bracket. We're going to pull straight up on this rubber grommet here, and that's going to pop this out of that bracket. Then we have two bolts here that hold the body of the strut on. It's a nut on one side, bolt on the other. And then finally we have this link arm here. We got to take this nut off. So we have three nuts total on this section, and take off that brake retainer. So again, we have this jacked up to take some of the tension off. We're going to go ahead and remove those bolts, and then I'll show you what's next. So you'll see here where I just pulled this straight up out, and you can see how that fits in there. Now I'm going to put a 18mm wrench on this side and my impact gun over here. We're going to get these two bolts off. Okay, now that second bolt I took off has a little pressure on it, so I can't freely slide that off yet, so we're going to let that be right now. We're going to go ahead and take this one here off. Get the light in here and show you. This is Torx inside here, so I need to put a Torx socket on here to hold this from moving as I undo this nut. And this again is 18mm, this is T40. Okay, once you have that off, this should be able to push right out the back side. You can see it's down a little bit. I actually have to jack this up a little bit more to get that pressure off of there. Once I have that line straight up, I can slide that off. Now I'm going to slowly lower the jack until I can pull this bottom nut out now. So now all the pressure's off of that, so I'll go ahead and bring this the rest of the way out. Okay, so now we have this completely hanging here. Now we're going to go up top. Okay, up above here, just pop this cap off. We're going to have this nut to take off to remove this upper retaining plate, and this is going to be 24mm. Also, it should be noted as you're undoing that nut, have a hand down below to catch a strut assembly so it doesn't drop down. Okay, and with that, the strut assembly is ready to pull out of here, and we can go ahead and replace this. Just put the new one in the same way we took the old one out. A couple things I want to point out here. So this is the entire strut assembly. You can replace just the strut without the spring if you have coil spring compressors. The way this particular vehicle is, you see how narrow that spring is at the top? Makes it impossible, I found, with my strut spring compressors, to compress this spring to put this assembly back together. This strut's about $100 by itself. With the spring already on, you can get the whole assembly for about $125. For that little bit more, get the whole pre-assembled assembly. If you want to save a few bucks, or if the strut you like doesn't come with the spring, which was my case, a local shop can usually compress these for you and put the springs on for you. I'm getting ready to run these down to my local shop, and for $25, he's going to go ahead and put each spring on. So 25 bucks a piece for each assembly. So once I get that back from him, I'll pop these back in and we're good to go. Okay, we got our strut assemblies back from the shop. They got our coil springs put on the new strut here. And you will notice there is a left and a right. If you look at the other side, your brake hose bracket's going to be on the other side. And your mount holes are going to face out on both sides. And you also have your arm there. So we're going to go ahead and cover reassembly on the driver's side here. We have a little bit more light over here. Okay, so we're going to start off with just feeding our assembly up through this hole. And then remember, we have our cap here. And then we're going to put this nut on. We're not going to snug it down. Just going to put that on there for right now, just to hold that in place. Okay, so making sure our holes here are facing forward, we're going to go ahead and get this worked in there. We have our jack underneath here to help get this in place. Looks like the jack might actually have to come down a hair to line this up. So all you can do is just move the jack up and down until you get those bolt holes lined up, and then just feed your bolts through. Okay, so once we got our bolts through, we can go ahead and tighten these down. Once we have those tightened down, come over here and go ahead and put your brake line through that bracket there. It holds it on. Just pop that in there. And now we're going to go ahead and snug up the top. So I'm going to go back up there and tighten up that top bolt. Alright, so we got our two main mount bolts here done. We got our upper bolt tightened down. We got our brake line on here. Next thing we have to do is put this arm back on. So go ahead and bring this arm over. And we're going to... Oh, that actually fit through there pretty good. That popped right in. Sometimes you may have to lift jack up or down on the control arm here to get that to line up. But just line it up so that feeds right through like it did there. And we'll go ahead and put this on as far as we can by hand. It's going to go about that far, and then we can go ahead and tighten that down. Now remember, we have the Torx on the inside to hold, and also then the wrench on the nut. And hopefully I'm not blocking the camera view, but you can see what we got going on here. Okay, so we got that back in, and that's all there is to it. We're all done. So just to recap, once you pop your wheel off and you get the vehicle jacked up and pop a wheel off, get a jack stand under there, take off that top bolt up here, that top nut rather, right here. We disconnect our arm, we take off these two bolts, and then, like I said, that upper nut's the last thing you're going to take off, just to be clear. And then make sure you're holding this, because when you take that off, this is going to drop down. But that's it. 1, 2, 3, and the nut up top, and your brake hose here, and that's it. That's all there is to it. Just use a jack underneath your control arm there to move that up and down to line up your bolt holes. So hopefully that helped you out. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe.